Good evening. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report.
Tonight, we're investigating two stories that reveal something deeply troubling about power in America right now. A federal shooting in Minneapolis that raises serious questions about use of force. And a dramatic shift in U.S. defense policy that's rattling our allies worldwide.
These aren't isolated incidents. When you look closely at the evidence, at the patterns emerging, you start to see a bigger picture about accountability, about who holds power, and about what happens when that power goes unchecked.
Let's start with what happened on Nicollet Avenue in Minneapolis on January 24th. We're going to walk through this carefully, because the details matter.
Alex Pretti was a 37-year-old intensive care unit nurse at the Minneapolis Veterans Affairs healthcare system. By all accounts, a dedicated healthcare worker who served veterans. On that Friday afternoon, he encountered federal agents conducting an immigration arrest.
And Maya, what we know from video evidence analyzed by Bellingcat is that Pretti did what many citizens do now: he started recording on his cell phone. He held that phone in his right hand, documenting what federal agents were doing on a public street in his city.
Within seconds, a federal agent sprayed him with what appears to be pepper spray or a similar chemical agent. Multiple agents then attempted to force him to the ground. The video clearly shows one agent in a gray jacket removing a handgun from Pretti's holster, a customized Sig Sauer P320 with distinctive features including a white grip, black frame, brown slide, and red dot sight.
Here's where this gets critical. 25 seconds after that initial contact, 10 shots were fired. Pretti was killed. And the Department of Homeland Security immediately characterized this as Pretti engaging in an armed struggle with intent to cause maximum damage to federal officers.
But the forensic video analysis tells a different story. Bellingcat's examination indicates that the firearm slide did not cycle during the encounter. In plain terms, that means the weapon wasn't discharged. The gun that DHS claimed Pretti used against them? The evidence suggests it was never fired.
The Minneapolis police chief confirmed what neighbors already knew: Alex Pretti was a legal gun owner with a valid carry permit. He had no criminal record. Minnesota is an open carry state. Everything about his possession of that firearm was legal.
So let's be clear about what the video evidence shows. Federal agents encountered a man filming them with his phone. They sprayed him with a chemical agent. They physically engaged him. One agent removed his legally carried firearm from his holster. And then two agents, one wearing a black beanie, another in brown, opened fire, discharging 10 rounds.
DHS identified one of the shooters as an 8-year veteran of Customs and Border Protection. But what they haven't explained is why their initial public statement characterized Pretti as the aggressor when their own agent had already disarmed him before the shooting began.
This is textbook narrative control. Within hours of the shooting, before any investigation could be completed, DHS had already framed Alex Pretti as a dangerous armed threat. They needed the public to see him as someone who deserved what happened.
And here's the context that makes this even more disturbing. This was the second fatal shooting by federal agents in Minneapolis in less than 2 weeks. On January 13th, just 11 days earlier, federal agents killed someone else in the same city.
We're seeing an escalation of federal law enforcement violence in American cities, particularly around immigration enforcement. And the pattern is consistent: use of force, immediate justification by authorities, and characterizations of victims that don't hold up under scrutiny.
The Border Patrol commander pushed back against any characterization of Pretti as unarmed, emphasizing that he did have a gun. But that's a red herring, isn't it? The question isn't whether he possessed a firearm. The question is whether he posed an imminent deadly threat that justified 10 rounds being fired into him.
Exactly. And the video evidence suggests the answer is no. He was recording with his phone. When agents engaged him physically and chemically, his gun was still holstered. An agent removed that gun. And then shots were fired. The sequence matters enormously.
This is happening at a moment when federal immigration enforcement is being dramatically expanded. When the stated policy is mass deportation. When agents are being deployed into cities with broad authorities and apparently minimal oversight.
And when someone dies under these circumstances, the immediate institutional response is to justify, to defend, to characterize the victim as a threat. Not to investigate transparently. Not to ask hard questions about use of force protocols. Not to consider whether an ICU nurse filming on his phone needed to die on a Friday afternoon in Minneapolis.
Alex Pretti's family is grieving. His colleagues at the VA hospital lost someone who cared for veterans. And the public deserves answers that go beyond DHS press releases that don't match the video evidence.
Now let's turn to our second story, because it connects to these questions about power and accountability in a different but equally important way.
Last month, the United States released a new national security strategy. This week, the Pentagon followed with its defense strategy. And according to Al Jazeera's reporting and analysis from defense experts, we're looking at what they call a clear departure from post-Cold War policies.
This isn't incremental change. This is a fundamental rethinking of America's role in the world, rooted in what officials are calling the America First approach. The strategy prioritizes homeland security and influence in the Western Hemisphere over the global engagement framework that's defined U.S. policy for 3 decades.
Let's break down what that actually means. Since the Cold War ended in 1991, U.S. defense strategy has been built on a framework of global alliances, forward deployment, and the idea that American security requires engagement everywhere. NATO in Europe, treaty alliances in Asia, partnerships across the Middle East and Africa.
The new strategy walks away from that. It explicitly prioritizes homeland security above those traditional alliances. It focuses American attention and resources on the Western Hemisphere, essentially, our own neighborhood, rather than maintaining the global posture we've had for decades.
And here's what's remarkable, the Pentagon is downplaying China as a threat priority. For years, both Democratic and Republican defense officials have called China the pacing threat, the primary long-term challenge to American power. This strategy deprioritizes that concern.
At the same time, the Pentagon is repositioning naval and air assets to the Middle East. So we're pulling back from global commitments, downplaying the China challenge, but ramping up military presence in one specific region that has historically been about oil, about Israel, about projecting power in a resource-rich area.
Al Jazeera's reporting indicates that Trump administration officials have been in heated debates with close allies about America's defense role globally. And that phrase, heated debates, is diplomatic language for something more significant. Our allies are worried.
South Korea, Japan, NATO members in Europe, these are countries that have built their own security strategies around the assumption of American commitment. And now that assumption is being questioned at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
The experts Al Jazeera brought on to discuss this include Adam Clements, a former Pentagon official now analyzing U.S. foreign policy, Marina Myron from the Defense Studies Department at King's College London, and Young-Shik Bang, who advises South Korea's defense ministry. These aren't fringe voices. These are people inside the system raising concerns about what this shift means.
Because here's what happens when the United States steps back from security commitments, other powers step in. If South Korea questions whether the U.S. will defend it against North Korean aggression, it considers its own options, maybe nuclear weapons development. If NATO members think America won't honor Article 5, they make different calculations about Russia.
And if Middle Eastern countries see the U.S. repositioning assets to their region while pulling back from Asia and Europe, they wonder what Washington wants this time. Is this about Iran? Is this about securing energy resources under a different framework? Is this about giving Israel even freer reign?
The strategy document talks about homeland security and the Western Hemisphere, but the troop movements tell a different story. You don't send carrier groups and air wings to the Middle East because you're worried about threats to Kansas. You do it because you're planning for military action in that region.
And this is where we need to connect these two stories, because they're both about the same thing, unchecked power and lack of accountability.
In Minneapolis, we see federal agents using lethal force against a citizen, then immediately controlling the narrative to justify that force, even when video evidence contradicts their characterization. The institutions close ranks. The official story becomes the only story, until independent investigators like Bellingcat do the forensic work.
In the Pentagon's new defense strategy, we see a parallel dynamic. The United States is restructuring its global military posture, walking away from commitments, creating uncertainty among allies, and positioning forces for potential conflict in the Middle East. And the public conversation about this is minimal.
There's no robust debate about whether this serves American interests or security. There's no congressional investigation into what these shifts mean for war powers and authorization. There's no transparent discussion with allies who've built their entire security frameworks around U.S. commitments.
Instead, we get strategy documents released with limited public attention, heated debates with allies behind closed doors, and troop movements that happen regardless of what the American people think about potentially being drawn into another Middle Eastern conflict.
Both stories reveal what happens when power operates without meaningful accountability. When institutions can act, then control the narrative about their actions, without independent oversight forcing transparency.
Alex Pretti is dead because federal agents made split-second decisions in an encounter that escalated rapidly. But those decisions happened in a context where agents know their institutions will defend them, where the official story will be broadcast before anyone can examine the evidence, where armed struggle and maximum damage become the framing before the body is cold.
And our allies are questioning their security relationships with us because officials in Washington can restructure decades of policy without congressional authorization, without public debate, without transparent explanation of why we're downplaying China while sending battle groups to the Middle East.
In both cases, by the time the public learns what happened, the decisions have already been made and implemented. We're told to trust the institutions, trust the official explanations, trust that the people with power are using it responsibly.
But the video evidence from Minneapolis says we shouldn't just trust. The worried statements from Allied defense officials say we shouldn't just trust. Trust has to be earned through transparency and accountability, not demanded through institutional authority.
Here's what investigative journalism is for. It's for moments like this, when official narratives don't match evidence. When policy shifts happen in shadows. When power acts without accountability and hopes no one looks too closely.
Bellingcat looked closely at the Minneapolis shooting and found that the firearm DHS claimed was used against agents likely wasn't fired. That's not a minor discrepancy. That's the difference between an armed struggle and an execution following a use-of-force decision that may not have been justified.
Defense analysts are looking closely at the Pentagon strategy and seeing a potential for Middle East conflict that isn't being honestly discussed with the public. That's not fear-mongering. That's reading what the troop deployments actually signal, regardless of what the press releases say.
We need to demand more. When federal agents kill someone in an American city, we need immediate independent investigation, body camera footage released within days not months, and consequences when the evidence shows unjustified force.
When the Pentagon restructures our global military posture in ways that could lead to war, we need congressional debate, public transparency about what we're preparing for, and a clear explanation of how this serves American security rather than just projecting power.
Because here's the thing about power without accountability, it escalates. The shooting on January 13th in Minneapolis became the shooting on January 24th. If there are no consequences, no changes to protocols, no acknowledgement that something went wrong, there will be a next time.
And the strategy shift that deprioritizes China today becomes the military engagement in the Middle East tomorrow becomes the war that no one authorized but everyone has to live with the consequences of. That's how this works when institutions operate without checks.
Alex Pretti was an ICU nurse who took care of veterans. He deserved better than to be killed on a street corner and then characterized as a violent threat when the evidence suggests otherwise. His family deserves the truth. The public deserves accountability.
And the American people deserve to know what their military is being positioned to do, what commitments are being walked away from, and what conflicts may be coming because of decisions being made right now without their input or consent.
This is Truth Report. We follow the evidence, we question the official narratives, and we demand accountability from the powerful. Because that's what journalism is supposed to do.
Stay informed. Stay critical. Don't accept the first story you're told, especially when it comes from institutions protecting their own.
For Truth Report, I'm Maya Clarity.
And I'm Alex Truth. Good night.